Okay, so my next guest is a gentleman called Franc Palaia. Today is a very, very special day for not only Frank, but also the Richard Hambleton market and also Woodbury House. I'm the co-founder of the company. We kicked off today with a press and a VIP private viewing of the Frank photography of Richard Hambleton Works on the Streets of New York, and also the nightlife standing shadow figures. And we felt it was only right to speak to yourself directly, have this podcast interview, and really talk about your background, how you got into photography, and your network of street artists, including Hambleton. So thank you, Frank, for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for doing this, and I appreciate and am excited about the Saatchi show. So I started out as a painter, and early on I started to use photography as a drawing tool, really. I like to travel a lot, and wherever I go, I'm always intrigued with what's on the walls of different countries, because you can always get a sense of the country by what's on the wall. So I have a saying that goes, walls are drop cloths of a society. It's sort of whatever is happening is very visual, very right there in front of your eyes. So I photograph a lot of street art and graffiti and murals, because I'm also a muralist, so I'm interested in walls in general. And over the years, I've accumulated quite a lot of wall imagery. And in 1980-81, I met Richard Hambleton, just a fluke. He happened to be at a party that I was at, and he was new to New York, and he introduced himself, and he really didn't know anybody. In fact, the party was in New Jersey, where I'm from, and of course he moved to New York. So he was kind of shy, very introverted, and getting anything for him to say something was like pulling teeth. But he did mention a series of paintings that he was going to do, and I was totally intrigued by it. And he said he was going to paint black shadow figures all over New York, mostly lower Manhattan, Soho, Tribeca, and the East Village. So because I was already photographing walls, in fact, I had just shot some photographs of early Basquiat graffiti with the Samo slogans and so forth. So it was right up my alley. So I asked Richard, I said, do you mind if I document your project? And he said, sure. So I started right away. The minute he started painting them, I was right there, like maybe the next day or 2 days later, photographing them. In fact, he would call me every couple of weeks to tell me where he did them, because I wanted to capture the shadows when they were fresh and black and clean and pure and beautiful. So, that's the early background story.
That's really cool. So I haven't explained this to you actually, because me and you, for some reason, I've only been connected in the last 24 hours. Maybe I should have spoken to you some time ago. But anyway, here we are. So my background, okay, this is how I got into the Richard Hambleton market roughly about 7 years ago, or slightly longer than that. A fairly well-established art dealer. He's actually featured in the Richard Hambleton Shadowman documentary, a guy called Andy. And he approached me because my background isn't in art. It's actually in sales and marketing. I used to promote for financial institutes, bonds, debentures, loan notes, etc. And he said to me, have I ever promoted art before? And I said, I've never done it. And he said, well, I represent this guy known as the godfather of street art. And the moment he said that, I thought of Banksy. Being in the UK, I thought Banksy. And he said, his name is Richard Hambleton. And I said, well, I've never heard of him. And he said, well, look, watch this trailer to his documentary. It's about 7 minutes long. It's fantastic. And literally after I watched the Shadowman trailer, I fell in love with the story. So much so, Frank, I actually bought a piece off of him. I gave it to our sales team. They also fell in love with the story, because who doesn't? I mean, once you watch it, it's so gripping. It's done very well. I mean, you feel slightly sorry for Hambleton, but also you see he's a creative genius. And then we sold the whole entire inventory that he gave to us within about 6-7 weeks. And anyway, the point I'm coming to is initially, when I was introduced to his market, I was also introduced indirectly to another photographer, a guy called Hank O'Neill. And when I first saw your work, without even knowing, I thought, oh, that might be Hank's work. And then when I started looking through your nightlife brochure, I was like, this is actually slightly different, and it's very, very cool. I really like it. And we've already had today people who are not actually clients, they're just people randomly walking through, have already inquired about your works on the wall. So you've definitely got some kind of talent which you've worked on over the years. You definitely get the right angles. I think it's very cool, very, very edgy, and it's great to see. So me being 34 years of age, Frank, okay, I didn't have the pleasure or the benefit of being in the 70s or early 80s and experiencing the streets of New York. From the horse's mouth then, what was it like? Because my understanding, it was quite a hostile place.
Well, yes. In the middle and late 70s, New York was kind of a mess. In fact, there's a famous newspaper headline. The president at the time, Gerald Ford, said, New York dropped dead. Which is, you don't want to hear that. So, there was a lot of crime, a lot of horrible, ugly graffiti. Every square inch of the city was covered with that scribbly, horrible graffiti. A lot of homeless people. I guess it was a recession. I wasn't familiar with recessions in those days, but it just was really just bad. And there was an exit of people from Soho, because it was getting too expensive and getting very slick, and people started moving into the East Village, which was a lower income neighborhood, multi-racial, multicultural, and so the rents were low. Artists could gravitate and get a decent little studio for not a lot of money. So a lot of artists were moving there, and roughly early 80s, late 70s, there was a lot of street activity. Basquiat was going around, Keith Harring, and Hambleton started his series, actually started another series in the late 70s called I Only Have Eyes for You, and that was a poster series. He put up hundreds of these posters of a photograph of himself, basically standing with a suit and tie. He had his hand in.
We have one in the show,
right.
And we have a few others which are affiliated to the show in the Saatchi brochure and the Start Art Fair sort of content. So I'm very familiar with them. And to be honest, I'm a huge fan of that work, because you're probably going to get onto this, so forgive me, but that was the birth of the shadow figures, because if I'm right in saying, he used to plaster them at the side of the wall and they used to disintegrate over time. And what was basically left was a shadow figure.
Well, actually a white figure, a white silhouette, because they were made on blueprint paper, which is very, very light sensitive, and it fades very quickly. So yeah, it went from a kind of a bluish color photograph to white. And in a way, it was the opposite of the next series, which he did, which were the black shadows. So those caught my eye, and I have a photograph of one of those in my nightlife book also. But then things really picked up speed in the early 80s, because the East Village was getting popular, and galleries were opening up. In fact, the Fun Gallery was, I think, the first gallery in the East Village where Keith Harring had his first show. And I was still photographing. I photographed the shadows for almost 10 years, from 81 to about 89. And he did, many hundreds of them all over the world. So, but I was really lucky and fortunate to get a crack at documenting these shadow paintings right from the get-go, right from the beginning. And I know you mentioned Hank O'Neill, who I didn't really know for years and years. I heard of his name much later. And he photographed a lot of the same shadows, of course, but his were photographed sometimes years after mine. And so mine have a purity of them. His are covered with posters and other scribbles. So they're different. They're the same shadow, but they're different. But I am, I just was lucky to get them right from the beginning because I happened to meet him at this party. So and then even in Europe, I was in several shows in Europe, and then wherever I went, in Venice, Rome, Amsterdam, I have some shadows from there as well.
Yeah. Cool. So, okay. So my understanding, so he went from I Only Have Eyes for You over to the shadow figures, and that obviously dovetailed into things like shadow hearts. There's been shadow cats, there's jumping shadow men, there's lurking shadow men, there's even like shadow women. We sold a canvas which was in the Giorgio Armani show from 1992, I think, and that was a shadow woman. So did he ever explain to you why he came up with the lurking shadow figures?
He never really explained it precisely, but this is my theory. Okay, he's a Canadian artist. He did a lot of street art in Canada for a few years before he came to New York. And so I think the black shadows are actually him. He was sort of saying to the art world in New York, here I am. You don't really know who I am because it's a mysterious black shadow, but here I am, and here I am over there, and I'm over there, and I'm around the corner, and I'm in the alley, and I'm on a dumpster, and I'm, he kind of was creating an army, really, a kind of an army of him. And of course, he likes the idea of being mysterious because I think it adds to the whole, the whole excitement and mystery of art in general. Like, who is that, and why is that there? And it scares the heck out of me when I turn the corner and see. It just had so many levels of power in a way. They were very powerful. One thing about there's a lot of street art out there, but there's something about those black shadows that once you see them, you never ever forget them. They were so powerful because in the early 80s, there really was not a lot of street art around. So they really stood out. And like I said, they scared the hell out of you. Even New Yorkers who can put up with a lot, that they always told me that, boy, even Richard said they scared him, because he would forget where he painted them, because he did so many, he forgot. I go, oh, wow, but anyway, I think they were him, basically, in a nutshell. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously being in 2020, we've got a big culture around the world that if a famous street artist, someone like a Banksy, does something on the streets of London or paints on a door or paints on anything, people typically try to preserve that piece and they rip it out of the wall or the door off, and then they either collect it or put it into auction, Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips. That culture didn't really exist back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, no one really considered graffiti or street art or public art, as Hambleton used to call it, as investment grade, and therefore they used to paint over it. I mean, when was the turning point in your mind when people started not looking at it as, vandalism, but more like, oh, okay, this is now becoming a recognized genre, and actually we need to start stockpiling this stuff and representing these artists in the right way, because it's going to become one of the most powerful movements in art history.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, the whole decade of the 80s, which is when Richard was painting these, ripping or cutting a wall out, no one really talked or thought of that. The only time that a Hambleton shadow was maybe plucked out of the street is when it was painted on a door, or like maybe a plywood panel or something like that. You could easily kind of take it with you. but no one was cutting out with saws, cutting out walls in those days. I don't know. It just didn't happen. And, well, that brings me, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, and I don't want to toot my horn too much, but the photographs, because see, none of these shadows exist anymore. They're long gone. But the photography, the historical documentation of the shadows, I think, is an important aspect of the whole
So important
genre. And so that's why, again, I was so lucky to be there from day one, and documenting them. And you know what's ironic? This is a little quick story. In 2011, they had the LA MoCA, the major museum in Los Angeles, had the first international graffiti show, a street art show called Art in the Streets. And it was a very historical show from the earliest street art all the way till that time. And I was in the show with my shadows, the Hambleton shadows, but Richard really wasn't in the show with his paintings, because of course he did paintings with the shadows as well. But he wasn't really in the show. I was in the show, even though he made the paint. It's kind of crazy. He made the black shadows, but he wasn't in it. I photographed him and I was in it. In fact, I was in the early room, the first room of the show, where they had all the historical early street art samples, like Tacky 183 and those early guys. So that's what's kind of odd and funny about the whole thing, is that the photographs, it's now 40 years later, and these shadow photographs are still, people are still interested. So I would never ever thought of this 40 years ago, that these photographs, although, when you did tell me, am I going on too long, by the way?
No, perfect. I'm actually really into what you're saying.
Okay. In fact, when he first told me about these shadows, that it was a little voice in the back of my head that said, Frank, I think this is going to be an important story. Maybe you should photograph them. And that little voice was absolutely right, because they're still here and they're still being sought after. And I'm just, I'm going along for the ride.
I think it's, I second that. It's so important, because for multiple different reasons. Obviously, you've documented the works that are no longer here, predominantly most of them on the streets of New York. I mean, I even saw one on the tree, which is in the Nightlife book.
Yeah.
And
right,
I don't know whether that's still around, but, all the others are going to be destroyed. And thanks to you, and maybe thanks to a few others, we could look back. I mean, I wasn't even born in 1981 or 82, but we can now look back and look at some of this fantastic work, and it makes you appreciate how his market is developed, and it makes you also appreciate how street art is kind of thriving, but thanks to its grassroots, where it first started, you really get to kind of understand it a lot more. So just talking about yourself a little bit more. So going back to like the late 70s, early 80s, and like you said, it was quite a hostile place, quite a dangerous place. I mean, yourself, Frank, did you ever feel like you were threatened? Did you ever see some crazy stuff? Gang, violence? Did you see shootouts? Did you see drug deals happen? Did you ever feel like you was in danger at any point when you were doing your work?
Well, I mostly photographed in the daytime, so I didn't feel that threatened. And even in those days, even though they were kind of rough neighborhoods, they weren't as rough as some others. So I'm always careful. I'm always looking around. No, so I didn't have any bad experiences. I've had other bad experiences in New York, but not while I was photographing the shadows. Richard he lived in a circle of pretty dangerous people. He was a drug addict for probably 40 years, a heroin addict, and that was besides his art, I think the next thing in his life was drugs, which it's a cliche.
It just heroin?
Yeah, he did everything.
And
I'm the opposite. I'm clean. I don't even take aspirin,
teetotal. Yeah, fair enough.
But anyway, so he was always kind of a mess. He was a strange combination of brilliant genius and absolutely a disaster. Like it's just a disaster on 2 feet. And in the two, just and if you see the documentary film Shadowman by Oren Jacoby, which is really a fantastic
Incredible
film. You saw it, and well, maybe you just saw the trailer. No, you saw the whole.
I've seen the whole thing. Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime now.
Yeah. Yes. So that film really captures Richard. And I don't know how Oren even managed to get that film together, because he was very difficult to deal with. He was, even though he was very shy, and kind of quiet, almost like a wallflower. I would see him over the years in the 80s. I'd see him at parties and openings, but he was always kind of on the edge. He would ride up on his little collapsible bicycle, and he would just sort of hang out at the edge, and then he would just be gone. He just was not, I think he was very awkward with people, and he didn't really know how to deal with people. He just lived in his own little world of drugs and painting on the street. Those basically the only 2 things that he did, really.
I'll tell you a story. So this morning at the Saatchi Gallery, obviously it was press opening, and there was loads of interviews, and there was an introduction to Star Art Fair, and there was people representing Saatchi, and we got mentioned, you got mentioned. It was fantastic. And anyway, I got introduced to a lady, a sort of an older, more mature lady, and we started speaking, and she said, yeah, I knew Richard. I used to interview him. And I said, oh, right, tell me a bit more. So as she was telling me about Richard, she said, this one story? She said one time after an interview, he had a series of interviews back to back, and they kept on trying to offer him food, and he said, I'll eat the food after the interview, or after the interviews. Anyway, with that, in the next breath, he fainted, but she thought he had died. He literally collapsed on the floor and went straight face first into the concrete. And someone came over and said, he actually does this all the time. He faints all the time because he's so hungry, because he goes days on end, because he's on drugs, and because his mind is elsewhere. And she was so frightened because she actually thought she just saw a man die. So he basically immersed himself into drugs. And look, obviously he was his own man, but let's be fair as well, Frank. What I've read is it was a big culture back then. Drugs, heroin back then was a big thing. And I even know his predecessors, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Harring, and many others were very, very same as well. I mean, is it something you would agree with?
Oh, yes. And then on top of all that, as if that's not bad enough, then you had AIDS. AIDS was pretty devastating. I mean, I had not just a few, but dozens of artist friends who died in the 80s. It was really scary. I mean, you know how the COVID is now? I mean, it was kind of like that.
Wow.
But it was a little bit more focused, like the COVID is the general population, but the AIDS was mostly creative people, artists, musicians, actors, dancers, those kinds of people. I don't know, maybe because there's a higher percentage of homosexuals in that area of the world. I don't know. But the deaths from AIDS was really bad. But yeah, Richard was, like I said, he was a mess, a physical mess most of the time.
So, because my understanding as well with his predecessor, Keith Harring, I mean, I think if I'm right, he died at about 33 years of age, very, very young man, only a year younger than me now. And he died of AIDS. And when I started researching, there's an AIDS charity called the AMFA, which brings awareness and education about HIV and AIDS. In actual fact, I think it was 2010 or 11 at the AMFA charity at the Cannes Film Festival. they donated 2 Richard Hambleton pieces that fetched nearly $1 million, and that was almost 10 years ago, basically. So I understand since the 70s and 80s, where AIDS and HIV were so rife, people didn't understand how the let's say the virus or the whatever you want to brand it as, how people contracted it. My understanding is a lot of people were getting HIV or AIDS because of sharing needles. So you've obviously got the damage of drugs, and then you also got the damage of, you know, contaminated blood going into your own bloodstream, and that's how the AIDS and HIV is manifested. And you're saying that was a big problem back then, yeah?
It sure was. It was. Artists were dying like flies. It's just, the list is just really long. Pretty shocking and pretty scary.
And do you know what? I mean, I've watched The Radiant Child, which is a documentary about Jean-Michel Basquiat, and I think the late David Bowie. No, actually, I got that wrong. So the film, the late David Bowie played Andy Warhol in the film, but The Radiant Child, which was the documentary, was really, really interesting. And I think I remember on that, they said when Jean-Michel Basquiat was trying to come off of heroin, people didn't prefer his art as much, even though they fetch a lot of money today. They actually preferred his art when he was deep on drugs and heroin, because there was a lot more pain and a lot more feeling. And in some ways, I understand that, because I remember hearing about Amy Winehouse, who was obviously a fantastic, legendary singer. She died premature, and they also used to say that when she was, you know, really hitting the drink hard, some of the most creative songs and the most passionate songs used to come out. And do you stand by that? Do you think that some painters kind of almost not need it, but they kind of need to be stimulated their emotions because of the drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, I mean, even John Lennon, you know, said that you know, he would take drugs, and then some of the more creative songs would come out at that time. You know, I also knew Basquiat. You mentioned Basquiat. I had a little bit of a thing with him with artwork.
What do you mean, a thing?
Well, it's a long story. I'll make it really short. He saw some of my paintings in a gallery. This is in the early 80s. Now, I should mention that my artwork, I don't just do the photography. You know, I also make these simulated urban walls. I actually fabricate them out of a mixed media, and they look like real walls, like they were just ripped out of a building, but they're completely simulated and fake, with using a variety of materials. So I had these little paintings in a gallery, and he saw them, and he told the gallery owner that he liked them very much. So the gallery owner told me this, and I said, well, that's interesting. That's nice to be liked by Basquiat. I mean, he was sort of an up-and-coming guy. He wasn't, at this time, he wasn't the big star that he is now, but he was, you know, coming up. This is a little bit after his first show at the Anina Nosei Gallery. And he was getting ready for his first major show at Mary Boone Gallery in Soho, right, which was a big deal. Anyway, so I contacted Jean-Michel, and during this period, early 80s, I was also collaborating with a lot of graffiti artists like Crash and Daze and Riff and Tracy 168 and again, and I was involved with Hambleton. So I was already kind of into the graffiti world. I also had a little bit part in the Style Wars film. Anyway, so I wanted Basquiat to, what I did with the graffiti artists is that they would do their tag on my walls, in which made their tag look realistic and made my wall look more realistic. So I wanted Basquiat to do the same thing. Like I said, he wasn't such a big deal at this particular time. So I called him up, and I knew where his studio was, and I told him my proposal, and he said, yeah, okay, sure, bring a piece over. So I brought one of my wall sculpture pieces over to his studio, his studio was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it was just a disaster. It looked like a hurricane hit it. It was about ankle deep in debris and garbage and litter, just amazing. And he had several friends in the back smoking joints that were about, a foot long.
Like baseball
And
bats.
so I left my wall there, and he said, okay, when it's done, I'll call you and you come back. So a month went by and I didn't hear from him. And I thought, let me call him, see what's happening with the wall. So I call him and he says, Frank, I got to talk to you. Come on over. That didn't sound good to me. So I went over there and I looked, and sure, he didn't touch the wall. And I said, what happened? He said that Mary Boone must have lectured him endlessly, because he's this young, wild guy and she's going to be showing his work. And so she probably lectured him, and she said, Jean-Michel, you're not a graffiti artist anymore. So he couldn't really do anything with my wall because it would mess up her plan with him, So as a consolation prize, I guess he felt bad. He asked me to paint 2 little paintings for him. I said, okay, sure. What do you want me to paint? So he looks down at all the litter in his studio, and he picks up 2 pieces of litter, and he says, here, paint these. And one was a parking stub, car stub, and the other one was a box of toothpaste. Huh. Okay, so I said, you want me to paint these? He said, yeah, sure. So how much you want, he says. I said, well, it's, I was a little bit surprised by all this, so I didn't really know what to ask for. I knew he had some money because he was already kind of successful, but I didn't want to be greedy. And also, by the way, while I was in the studio, the phone kept ringing, and it was usually somebody like Warhol wanted to go play racquetball with him, but he didn't want to do it. While he's talking on the phone, I'm looking around at the litter, and I saw checks made out to him for $8,000, $10,000. Now, this is like almost 40 years ago. So $8,000 was equivalent to, $35,000. And they were mixed up with the litter on the floor. So he was kind of like just a wild
that is mental
child, Anyway, so I said, 500 each. Okay. So he pulls out of his ripped up jeans, he pulls out 5 crisp $100 bills. He fans them out like playing cards. He goes, here, this is probably drug money. I don't know, maybe not. He gives them to me and he says, okay, do the paintings. When you finish, bring them back. I'll give you the rest. I said, okay. So I go home, I paint the little paintings. It only took me like a couple of hours. And about a couple of weeks later, I brought him back to him. But he was now in a bigger studio. Warhol found him a bigger studio up the street. And so I brought them there. He paid me. Then he had his show, his big opening at the Mary Boone Gallery. And of course, it was a big success. I went there, and, I felt like I was his buddy. I went early. I talked to him, and Warhol was there and so forth. Anyway, but that's, it's like a little window in the world of Basquiat at that particular time. And then it's funny, and then several years later, after Basquiat died in 1988, I got a call from Crash, the graffiti artist. He said, Frank, I saw your 2 paintings at Christie's auction house, which is, a big deal. And I said, Christie's? I don't remember anything going to Christie's. And he said it was the Basquiat collection.
Wow.
So his father, Basquiat's father, of course, realized his son was the golden goose. Everything he touched was gold. But yet when he cleaned out his studio, he probably came across my 2 paintings, which were probably thrown on the floor with the other litter. He didn't know who I was, so he put them up for sale. And they sold for like maybe twice what I got. But it just was a kind of an odd end to a little interesting experience. But it was nice. It was interesting meeting him because to see what he was like in person rather than this like mysterious romantic figure that he is now.
Yeah.
And he was really just a kid, really just a down to earth, but he was, in a way, he was brilliant in his own way too, just real like Hambleton was. And he was also very calculating. They were both very calculating
Yep.
in general.
They all seem to be a little bit of a tormented soul in some respects, and fairly intricate people in other ways, because like you said, they're introverts, but then at some other points they're not. They're quite hard work, very creative, on drugs, kind of an abusive lifestyle a bit. So you mentioned there you met Andy Warhol. I mean, what was he like?
Well, I didn't, he just was standing next to Basquiat, kind of like a mannequin. He's just sort of like this standing figure. He just, again, I think he was shy also,
He adored Basquiat, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think he kind of got a second wind. He sort of was living through Basquiat, because Basquiat was this rising superstar, which is what Warhol was. And so I think he could relate to Basquiat. And also, he was trying to guide Basquiat, to doing the right things. And of course, Basquiat adored Warhol too, because he was his role model,
Yeah.
Warhol's such an example of
like a mentor,
success, and so it was a mutual admiration society between those two, I think.
Yeah. So and Keith Haring, the reason why I mentioned obviously Hambleton and Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring is because part of my sort of research, and when I'm speaking to collectors, investors, or anyone looking at Hambleton for the first time, and including if they're going to be buying your photography, because I think it's important to give them the backstory to everything. There was a publication made in 1983, Frank, from the International Herald Tribune, and it said this. It said, there's a great love or surge of street art. If you were to buy a Jean-Michel Basquiat back in 1983, you'll be paying roughly $10,000. If you were buying a Harring or a Hambleton, you'll be paying roughly about $15,000. Okay, so these are kind of case studies, and they've obviously been linked. Did you ever come across Harring?
Well, I met him a couple times. I didn't really talk to him at length at any particular time, but I liked him, and he was a little different from the other two. I know the three of them are always kind of linked together because they kind of came up at the same time, and they were doing, street art at the same time. But Harring, I think, had a totally different attitude and personality. He was actually more outgoing. And as he got older and more successful, he even became more outgoing. And I think he became almost like a public artist. He just loved doing those murals with kids, and kids loved him. He was sort of like the candy man, he just had a following of so many people, and children really liked him a lot. Children didn't relate to Hambleton or Basquiat. They were kind of dark and,
very dark and edgy.
But Harring was bright colors and cheerful and upbeat and positive and fun, and he just was a totally different kind of artist. I mean, they had similarities and same age and that sort of thing, but he ended up being a totally different public artist. And I think he really liked people, and he really appreciated that they liked his work. And the more they liked him, the more work he did. He was unbelievably prolific.
Yeah.
Because he was so young, and he did so much in those 10, 15 years. It's amazing.
I know.
And actually, Basquiat too.
Yeah, I know his work. I know his work. Sorry, Frank, is categorized as street art, but if you really look at it, it's fairly similar to a pop art type genre. I mean, you could kind of put him in the same bracket, or looking wise, as someone like an Andy Warhol kind of. Yeah. He's quite bubbly and bright, as you said.
Because I just remembered something about Keith Haring that was different from the other two. He opened up the pop shop. He had all these products, T-shirts, and skateboards, and all. The other two, they didn't do anything like that. But he was very. Maybe you could say that he was more commercially oriented, Harring. than
Yeah.
the other. And I don't know if he was into drugs. I really don't know, but he just was. I don't know. He was a little bit more. I don't know what the word is. Compatible with the general society, the overall society, and as
Yeah.
an artist being out there and doing good work and being public figure in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard some collectors before have thrown out this comment, and this is not my words, this is them. Harring and also Basquiat, they may have sold themselves out quite sort of soon. And the reason why they say that is because they started to cooperate with the art world a lot more than Richard Hambleton, because Richard Hambleton, people dub him as well as a true artist. He done it not for the fame, not for really money. He didn't do it to please someone. He done it because he wanted to do it. Whereas the other two, they would work with big galleries, they would work with financial institutes, massive organizations, and they would get their market built up. Now, in many ways, that's the right way to do it, because if you're going to build your market and scale it, of course, you need to work with the right galleries, you need to work with the right people, art agents, and that's how your market can go from here to here. And part of the reason why Richard Hambleton's market was kind of chaotic for a long time is because he wasn't working with everybody. So, I mean, so I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but what's your take on that? You know, with them working with the art world, but Hambleton not, how do you think that's played on all of their markets?
Yeah, I think you've got exactly right. Basquiat and Harring, they would work with galleries, and I think that they would understand and appreciate that they were helping them. Hambleton was he was this like lone wolf out there. And like I said, he was very difficult to deal with because he was so erratic and irresponsible and just kind of, you just really couldn't do it. If in fact you could see in the film Shadowman, the two dealers, Andy and
Vladimir.
They just couldn't, they tried and tried, knocking on his door, trying to get him to, sign some paintings or finish something, or it was constant aggravation with Richard.
Yeah.
That you just, you didn't understand, why are you doing it? Don't you want to make some money and live, But what's ironic is that and kind of crazy is that Richard would make a ton of money like this month, millions sometimes. And then it was all gone like 6 months later. I mean, he did things like he bought a Cadillac. He lived on Rivington Street, which is one of the most decrepit streets in Lower Manhattan. And he bought a white Cadillac, I mean, I don't even think he had a driver's license. I don't understand why he would do something. That's what I mean. It's just silly, crazy things. And yeah. And I should have taken a photograph, because one day I saw the white Cadillac parked in front of his studio building, in the midst of all this debris and junk.
Yeah.
This shiny white Cadillac, and nobody touched it. He was well known in the neighborhood. And then all the drug people, they didn't bother him, so no one bothered his car. I mean, it wasn't stolen. The tires were not stolen or anything, but just this crazy thing to have a white Cadillac in Manhattan when you don't even drive.
That's testament to his personality, I guess.
Yeah.
Here's what I was going to say as well. So going back to his predecessors, Basquiat, and then Basquiat's mentor, which was Andy Warhol, do you think in some ways, because of the affiliation and the connection and even their collaborations, because they've done some collaboration pieces, Warhol and also Basquiat,
Right.
do you think that is part of the reason why Basquiat's market has gone crazy? Because I saw a piece which I researched. In 1984, it got sold under the hammer in auction for $19,000, and it reappeared in auction in 2017, and it's got sold for $110.5 million. And obviously it comes down to supply and demand. He's not here anymore. The second thing is financial interests from, let's say, the copyright or the estate or people that have got a big interest in Basquiat. But then also I thought, well, people are connecting the dots. They're connecting him to Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol was a legend. You know, he blazed the trail in pop art. Do you think that plays a big part in the value of the artist?
You know, a little bit, but in a way, Warhol came at the very end, and it's I don't, you know, Basquiat was already kind of actually established and popular, and you know, Warhol was sort of like a little cherry on top. I don't think that, in a way, I think Warhol was using Basquiat because Basquiat was the hot new thing. Warhol was kind of fading, you know, the older guy, you know, not so interesting anymore. I think that Warhol was using Basquiat in a very subtle way and
Right.
kind of globbing onto Basquiat's reputation rather than the other way around.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But also, I was going to say, oh, yeah, now, of course, Hambleton would never collaborate like that. He just was his own thing. And then I don't think Keith Haring did collaborate with other artists, but Richard never did. I don't know any piece or work that he did with anybody else.
We've got one in our studio, and you probably know this artist. Is a guy that goes by the name of LA2.
Yeah, LA2.
Yeah. So we've got a shadow head here, and then around there is the squiggles that LA2 does. Yeah. Very similar, actually, to Keith Haring. I mean, my understanding was they were almost painting partners, LA2 and also Keith Haring.
Yeah, that's right.
And you mentioned earlier, you documented the work of Basquiat when he used to go by the tagline Samo. Well, I'm also on the understanding that the other painter called Out Diaz, he used to also use the word Samo as well. So it seems to be that two of them have absolutely gone to the next level. And then you've got LA2 and also Out Diaz that are obviously great and they're legends, but they haven't gone to that next level. Why do you think that is?
Well, I met Al Diaz recently. I was in a show with him up at the Vanderplas Gallery and in Manhattan. I know he started like the early days of the Samo period. He started with Basquiat, and you know, I don't remember the details of the story, but somehow they kind of fell apart, and I don't know what it was, why that happened. But Basquiat just kind of went off on his own, and Al Diaz, I don't know what happened with him, but you know, Basquiat was like a rocket ship. It was maybe hard to hang on to him.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think between of the three of Harring and Basquiat and Hambleton, Hambleton's market is like it's flippity jibbity, you know, because of his personality, and he was hot and cold, you know, in and then out, because he disappeared for many years. I think it was in the 90s, early 2000s. He also was very ill. He died 3 years ago, and he had several really serious diseases. I mean, he had scoliosis, he had the drug addiction.
He had cancer.
He had cancer. I mean, it's amazing he lasted as long as he did, really.
Well, people speculate, Frank, that because he was on so many drugs and he had so many different illnesses, he actually pickled himself. You know, when you like take so many drugs and it kind of preserves you, because the cancer and stuff, it can't spread because the drugs are taking over. So this isn't this is not a promotion to take drugs if you've got cancer, but I'm just saying if you're taking that many drugs, it might have slowed down the process of it all.
No, you don't want to pickle yourself.
You definitely don't. But yeah, like you said, he was hot and cold. He was all over the place. He disappeared, and then obviously he got resurrected by Andy and Vladimir, and they done 5 shows around the world with Giorgio Armani. And obviously now in the early, like the more modern times, ourself, Woodbury House, we've been on his market since 2014. We've been helping drive the market. We've done some shows over in Dubai, Mexico City. We've done many collaborations over here, even with a clothing company called Dark Circle Clothing, which was absolutely amazing. We end up getting into Hypebeast and also Vogue Italia. We've been in GQ, Huffington Post, Wall Street International. So I think all these things actually help the market. And then since his death, which is the anniversary this month, 3 years ago, you've seen other big brands now jump on the back end of it. So I see the market going up and up and up and up, up and up. A question I wanted to ask you. So 2 questions really. When you knew Basquiat, right? You was obviously in and around the era. You've probably documented some of his work as well and many others. Knowing them, and they were fairly successful. But now looking at his market and seeing pieces go for $110.5 million, how does that honestly make you feel?
How does it make me feel about those prices?
Yeah.
They are, they are a little out of whack. I mean, he was a very, good artist. He had so much energy and he was kind of original. Also, I think because he was half Black and half Hispanic, I think that is another little element in the Basquiat story, which you don't have. Richard's this kind of ordinary white guy from Canada. Keith Harring is this white guy from Pennsylvania. But Basquiat had that exotic, there really wasn't an African-American superstar, so to speak. So I think that might have has a little bit to do with it. And he also had a lot of mystique around him too. I mean, all these artists, like these guys, they all have a little romantic mystique around them. So that adds to the value of their work. But what was I forgot your question.
So how do you feel like, because you got to know these people on a personal level, so you would have seen pieces back then maybe sell for 10, 15,000, but now they're going for tens of millions of dollars. I mean, does it surprise you? Does it shock you? Did you have a gut feeling it might go there? What do you think about it? How do you feel about it?
I kind of thought it was going to go like that, but I didn't realize it was going to go that high. I mean, 110, 15 million. Wow. I mean, that's like Picasso.
That's the masters, isn't it?
Price.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little crazy. There's a lot of really rich people out there who have a lot of money to spend on one painting, which is kind of shocking. If you can spend that much money on one painting. So anyway, I mean, but Richard, his prices, have held, pretty well. I mean, they could have been a little higher, but they could have been lower too. I mean, he could have been, this sort of has-been weird guy, with the shadows and who cares and forget about it. But he managed, even with his incorrigible personality, he still manages to command some decent prices for his work.
Well, Frank, just a couple of things on that. When I was on his market in 2014 and 15, we were selling his shadow heads between 4,000 to 8,000, depending on size, year, and quality. Those same heads today in London, anyway, are selling between 40, 50,000, 60,000. And I've actually seen some fairly big galleries in London sell up to about 80 or 90,000. Okay, which I'm not saying I agree totally with the prices, but it kind of demonstrates where they believe the market is going to go. And we was in the Saatchi show earlier, and a random person walked over. They were looking at your work, and then they looked at the standing shadow figures, which are laid out like an army. And I explained the backstory. I explained the original. I said they're part of the Nightlife series. They're not from 1985, so it's probably the best era for as far as if you're going to invest. I would try and buy 80s, because if you look at all the greats like the Basquiats and the Harrings, etc., their pieces have fetched a huge amount of money from the 80s. She said, how much are they up for? Well, I said, well, Saatchi have put a price on it for 150,000, one of them. And she said, oh, I thought it'd be more than that. So for this lady to say that, it was kind of like, wow, okay, that's cool. Like, because she actually believes where the market's going. Do you feel Hambleton can get to the same sort of level as, let's say, the Harrings or the Basquiat? Because a lot of people are saying, you know, there's a potential there.
Oh boy, that's tough because you know he's not around anymore. Also, you know, Richard's work was he didn't do a lot of really huge paintings. You know, a lot of Basquiat's work is quite big, and even Cat Harring's too. But you know, Richard's work was sort of middle range. I know he did some big pieces, but with like the several figures and like the Armani commissions, where he did several figures on one big. But they don't, you know, they're a little bit on a smaller scale, and maybe that's part of it, you know, because they're based on the figure. So the figure is sort of life size in most of them, more or less.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe the scale of them has something to do with it. So it's hard to say. I think, you know, Richard did these shadows for so many, 40 years, and he was still painting the shadows. I don't know if he grew as much as the other two artists, because Keith Harring got into big monumental sculpture, and he did, 100-foot murals, and even Basquiat's work was big, and but Hambleton's was sort of in this like a little smaller scale range, and they were like locked into that vertical figure, which you can't get that big with it, or else it starts to look a little weird, you know. I don't know if he maybe did a 90-foot mural with one huge figure. That might have been something that might have gotten some attention and might have added to his cachet.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Well, last year a piece went for 550,000, which actually was not one of his recognizable pieces. It was one of the beautiful landscapes, a blue wave landscape from 1985, which is quite surprising because you would have thought that something like a bigger, multiple standing shadow figure painting, like the Armani ones that you described, would have gone for that kind of money. But many are saying now this is the start, because if you research any artist that has passed away, all the greats, Roy Lichtenstein, you've got obviously Picasso, etc. It roughly takes about 5 years for the art market to wake up, realize they've died, there's no more painting anymore, the supply is being diminished, and the market corrects itself. And that means we've probably got another 12, 18, 24 months before the market really catches fire. I mean, look, whether it gets to $110.5 million is hard to say, but is it going to get into the millions? I think so, because look at Banksy, who's been referenced with Hambleton because of all the influence. Today, there's a piece going into Sotheby's called Show Me the Monet, and that's got an estimate, I think, between £3 to £5 million. It's not a very big piece, really, at all. And he's still alive, and he's still painting. So surely that gives it a lot of grounds to think, you know what, his pieces will go to the tens of millions of pounds in years to come.
Well, as time goes by and, Richard is further into history, then the rarity of every Hambleton piece might help the prices that go up. But, it's hard to say. Especially now the art world with the COVID and everything, it's how is the crowds there at the Saatchi Museum? Because you can't have too many people in there, can you?
Today is only press and also art investors who have bought the pieces can see their works. So tomorrow is the VIP launch, and we can have, I think, 25 to 30 people in the space at any one time. But then we have slots, so people rotate, and we're already packed out. You know, people are really looking forward to it. So yeah, we're very, very excited.
People are hungry for art. You know, they've been so isolated for so long. I guess people are really anxious to get out and see artwork.
Yeah, and also, Frank, I mean, I was going to ask you this question, whether you agree with the investment side of art or whether it should be just, you know, used to enjoy and collect and also decorate your home or office. But, you know, we can't ignore that, you know, people can make a huge amount of money from art, and they can flip art and they can trade art, etc. And at the start of COVID, this is what I noticed. People were waking up to the fact that Hambleton has died, so that was driving the market. You've obviously got financial interests of these big corporations that are driving the market. But then COVID came along, and we was unsure what was going to happen. But Forbes done an article at the start of COVID, and they compared blue chip stocks and shares to blue chip art around the world. And their headline was this: the art market is beating the stock market. And what that encouraged people to do is start buying more art, because they didn't want to keep it in the banks. They didn't want to keep it in ISIS bonds, stocks and shares, or anything affiliated to banks, because we knew what happened back in 2008, 2009 with the credit crunch and the banking crisis. So what people start buying is tangible assets, and art is obviously being one of them. So as they came into the art market and they saw more publications, more articles, more supporting evidence of the market really compounding and being a great place for your money, people started to buy quite aggressively. And I've got to tell you, Frank, in May this year, we had our biggest financial turnover month in 7 years, in the heart of COVID. So I think art has got two elements to it. You've got the collectible side to enjoy, but then you've got the financial instrument side of things. What's your take on that? Do you think art should be used as a financial tool, or should just be to enjoy?
Well, it can be both. I mean, you know, I think I see it as, okay, you have a lot of money. If you buy art, you can see your money. You know, you can enjoy your money in your house. You know, instead of just in the bank. So there's an added level of pleasure if you have a lot of money, or you don't have to have a lot of money. You can have a little bit of money and have interesting artwork and enjoy it in your home.
Yeah.
So yeah, sure. You know, everything is turned into a business now. Everything, absolutely everything. So why shouldn't art be a big business? There's always something that people are willing to pay money for.
Yeah, of course. I used to hear, and I hope you can verify this, but Basquiat, Harring, and Hambleton used to trade their art with one another. And I heard that Basquiat used to give 3 pieces of artwork for every one of Hambleton's when they first started, because he was more recognized. And I think it was a Hank O'Neill shot of a Hambleton shadow figure on the streets of New York with a Basquiat Samuel skull over the top. And when he challenged him on it, he said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I'm not as recognized as Hambleton, and to get recognition, he would go over the top of his work." I mean, so in theory, I'm answering my own question, which is people are trading the artwork as almost a currency, because it's going to be worth something.
Yeah, in fact, I have that same shadow in my book with the Basquiat skull.
Yeah,
but you just made me remember that you're talking about trading artwork. Well, Hambleton did it in a kind of a sneaky way, as he was kind of sneaky in general. He would put up, you know, Harring was, in the early days, he was well known for doing the white chalk drawings on the black
mass
poster.
murder scene.
No, in the subways, you know, they have a lot of advertisements. But between the ads, there's just black paper, you know, on the wall in that poster section. And so Harring used to do these nice little, you know, white chalk drawings of his crawling babies and all that. So Hambleton saw that, and so what he did was he would go around at night and put up his own pieces of black paper on those sections. And of course, he would wait a few days, and then Harring would do a drawing, because to Keith Harring, they looked exactly like what they normally look like. So then Richard would go back and he would peel off his black piece of paper, and he had an original Keith Harring that he didn't have to pay for.
Yeah,
so
incredible.
Yeah,
Smart move. Very,
and actually, it reminds me, I forgot to mention my Basquiat story, and this is probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done. When he asked me how much I wanted for the paintings, while I was thinking, Basquiat reached behind his couch and pulled out a piece of wood, and he goes, "Here, you want this?" And what it was a little Keith Harring painting on a little piece of wood, about maybe 18 inches long. And now remember, this is 1981, when Keith Harring was just this young punk who was going around scribbling cartoon characters on the wall. It wasn't such a big deal. But I should have taken that painting, even though it wasn't a very good painting. It didn't matter. It would have been worth way, way more than what he.
I was going to say, do you collect art? Do you have Hambletons or any of the greats?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, Richard gave me a couple of pieces over the years. He gave me a print, big, beautiful, nice print of the "I Only Have Eyes for You" series, but it was a lithograph, and it was quite big, maybe 7 feet by 2 feet wide, and then and it was hand colored. And then he also gave me a sculpture. He did a sculpture series for Creative Time in the mid to late 80s. They were cut out plywood figures, sort of like a standing man, basically him again. It's a man like wearing a suit.
A blue suit, yeah.
Yeah, blue suit, and he was holding an attaché case and the attaché case had a mirror on it. So he made, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 of these, and then they stuck them in the ground in different parts of Lower Manhattan. One of them was broken at the knees, and he gave me that, because I would give him photographs of my shadows, periodically. I didn't give him every one, but I gave him some. And so as a thank you, he gave me these works of art, which I actually recently sold. But yeah, so, and I trade with all my artist friends, because artists usually can't afford their own art.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, okay, does Basquiat have $110 million to buy, a Basquiat? I don't know. I don't think so. Probably so artists, and the only way artists can get artwork is to trade. So I've been doing that for decades. I have a pretty decent little collection of all kinds of works that I didn't really pay for, just traded.
Well, if you ever want to sell any of them, or especially your Hambletons, just keep us in mind, okay? So, the other question I wanted to ask is, I think it's still unknown. Maybe you can kind of verify this. Basquiat's death and also Hambleton's death. How did they die? Because I heard that Basquiat's was something to do with like a relapse of drugs, and then Hambleton, it was kind of like he's dead and now he's dead, but I don't really understand how he died.
Okay, so for Basquiat, this is what I've heard over the years. Of course, he was also, took drugs, and I think he overdosed on heroin. And he, a lot of times you vomit, and I think he vomited in his sleep, and he actually died from the vomit. He drowned in his own vomit. That's really how he died. But the drugs obviously was the main cause. And with Hambleton, I just think it was an accumulation of so many diseases. And I saw him maybe a few months before he died. They had a little show of his work in Chelsea. They threw together some pieces. I know what it was. It was to celebrate the film, the Shadowman film. So they put together a little quickie show of some of his works, just from people's collections. They really were not for sale. They just were for show. And it was just a rented a loft in Chelsea, and I was there, and the night was maybe 3 hours long, and then finally the last like half hour, finally Richard showed up at this show, and he's walking with a cane. He's curled up because he had the scoliosis, so he's like a pretzel basically, and he had a big scarf wrapped around his lower face because half of his face was missing because of the cancer. They took a good section of his face away, and then his eyes were bulging out, and he just looked like a monster. It was just so sad and shocking. And the actor Paul Rudd was there, and he's famous for commercial movies and other movies. But anyway, he's a big collector of Hambleton, so he actually walked him around the gallery arm in arm so Richard wouldn't fall over. I mean, he was just, decrepit, and I think he just died of accumulation of all those
Wow.
problems.
That is so sad.
It was really sad. I mean, I'm glad I was there just to, get one last look of this, Richard on the planet Earth, but
yeah.
I have pictures.
I
have pictures. I'll show you if you want to see them. They're just really.
I would love to see them actually. Well, it's also validating that a lot of important people are collecting his work, because you said Paul Rudd there, he's collected Hambleton's work. I mean, this must be very high profile people. I know Giorgio Armani has, a lot of his work as well, and there must be other high profile people, important people that you know about that have collected Hambleton's work as well.
Well, I can't rattle their names off the top of my head. There's a lot of collectors out there. A lot of people in the art world. I think more people in the art world have worked than just general population, because they kind of know the history of him. And it's a particular story, like what I'm telling you now about Richard. Most people don't know all the detail about him.
So your own market then, Frank. I want to sort of wrap up the interview shortly, but I want to just so the audience, understands about you. So obviously you do painting as well as photography. Where do you see your own market going in the next, few years? Have you got ambitions? Have you got anything else that you would like to do? What's next for Frank?
Well, I work in so many different mediums, and I feel like I'm kind of like a juggler, balancing plates, and I've got like 7 or 8 different plates going.
Spinning plates, yeah.
Yeah, and because I do painting, photography, sculpture, murals, curating. I'm also a musician. I've done public art, artist books, sign painting. I kind of do a lot of things. So, but somehow they're all kind of interconnected and interrelated. For example, I have my wall pieces that I'm making, and recently blew up some of my Hambleton shadow figures and incorporated them into my wall pieces. And you'll be able to see them in the video that they made with me.
I saw. Yeah, it looks very, very cool.
Be in the background that the shadow figures are not quite life size. They're almost life. They're about 4 or 5 feet, but I want to make some bigger ones, and because like I say, I was been collaborating with a lot of graffiti artists, and they do their thing on my walls, and it makes everything look more realistic.
Yeah.
So I'm showing a lot of those around, and this summer I painted 7 murals, which is kind of amazing, because with COVID and everything, I thought I'm never going to get any commissions, but for some reason they came out of the woodwork, and I painted 7 murals this summer.
Yeah.
Which is more than I usually do. So yeah, I'm constantly maneuvering around the different aspects of the market, like photography and paintings and sculpture, curating. I've curated about 40, 50 shows over the years, and but I only do that sporadically because it's very time consuming and it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So, what do I have come? And then I've been in some films, like the Shadowman film. I have 30 photos in that film, and in the Basquiat film, it's also a very good film about the teenage years of Jean-Michel Basquiat. It's called Boom for Real, and it's the director's Sarah Driver, who's the wife of the filmmaker Jim Jarmusch.
Okay.
He's a little better known, but it came out a couple years ago, and I have a couple photos in that film. And so, yeah, I kind of play the whole field. I don't just do one thing. So, I'm just trying to make my way with the COVID and everything. And I have some virtual shows that are coming up. One is going to be in Rome. At the Temple University.
Okay.
I did a lot of virtual shows lately, so.
Yeah, virtual auctions, virtual shows.
I don't know if they actually count as real shows, but I don't know.
Well, I guess they're going to have to be these days, but
yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning again that your works are at the Saatchi Gallery, which is a powerful brand to be aligned with. And Woodbury House, we're having a new division. So we've been typically dealing with blue chip art, but now we have a retail arm, and our website is about to launch very soon. So we're going to have Franc Palaia photography on there for sale. We're also going to have the merchandise.
By the way, Steve, it's Palaia. You're adding an L to my name. There's one L. Palaia. Yes.
Palaia. Yeah, sorry, I'm terrible with pronouncing names. I'm just going to keep it as Frank for now. But anyway, there's the merchandise, there's the collectible items. We've even got things like skate decks, and I think it's very, very important for the new demographic of art collector or art investor to be able to buy different types of art through different type of mediums, but at a sensible price point, and then when they feel comfortable they can start stepping it up. So I'm very, very excited to see that. Okay, Frank, well look, I really admire you coming on board and sharing some really, really great stories. I thank you for your time, mate, and this episode is going to be out next week on my podcast next Wednesday, a week today. So as soon as it's ready, I'll send it over to you. We're going to put it on YouTube, on Woodbury House's YouTube, my YouTube, and we're going to put it on Instagram, Facebook. It's going to go out then. I'm pretty sure we're going to get some very, very good feedback on it. Okay.
Terrific, Steve. Thanks again. It was really fun, and looking forward to see what happens with the Saatchi show. Definitely.
Well, there's definitely going to be a lot of sales. I can tell you that much. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, all the best for the future. Be happy and never content, my friend. And what I'm going to do right now is spin the computer, probably get some photos with you. And that's it. Or we don't need to. Okay. We don't need to do that, actually. Okay. So thank you for your time, Frank. And I'm going to check out. All right. And I'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Bye.